For 3 years, my daughter-in-law treated my retirement savings like her personal backup account. But the night she ordered thousands of dollars in wine and seafood for her family, then expected me to pay for all of it, she finally pushed too far. What I did with that bill changed our family for good. The text message arrived on Tuesday morning, featuring a reservation screenshot for an upscale seafood establishment on Martha's Vineyard. My son Mark added a brief note explaining that his wife Vanessa was hosting a family gathering to celebrate her mother's upcoming retirement from corporate accounting. For 40 years, I worked as a licensed physical therapist in Providence, carefully saving my earnings and maintaining a modest pension alongside my late husband's life insurance. I managed my finances prudently, living in a comfortable 2-bedroom cottage near the coast, while enjoying quiet weekends tending my garden. Vanessa frequently implied that my disciplined saving habits meant I possessed limitless disposable funds. When I accepted the dinner invitation, I assumed Mark and Vanessa were treating her mother Evelyn to a special evening out. Upon arriving at the harbor restaurant, the crisp Atlantic breeze carried the scent of salt water and grilled oysters. The dining room offered panoramic ocean views through floor-to-ceiling windows, with white linen tables arranged under crystal chandeliers. Evelyn sat at the center table, wearing designer jewelry flanked by Vanessa and 2 of her adult cousins who had joined the party. Mark looked tense, shifting uncomfortably in his navy blazer as he greeted me. Vanessa gestured toward the empty chair at the end of the long table, immediately signaling the server to bring the reserve wine list. Before taking my seat, I quietly asked Mark if this was a fixed menu event, but he quickly brushed off my question with a nervous laugh. Throughout the first half hour, Evelyn loudly discussed her expensive tastes, insisting that everyone order the market-price seafood towers and dry-aged steaks. Vanessa enthusiastically supported her mother's choices, ordering 2 bottles of rare vintage Cabernet without checking the price. I noticed how casually they added side dishes and appetizers, completely ignoring the cost printed on the thick leather menus. Instead of ordering the costly specials, I calmly selected a simple baked cod plate and a glass of house iced tea. Watching Vanessa interact with the waitstaff brought back clear memories of the past 3 years. Ever since she married Mark, she viewed my personal savings as a shared family resource, meant to cushion her lifestyle desires. Last Christmas, she subtly left catalog pages marked with expensive designer handbags on my kitchen counter, expecting me to purchase them. When I bought her a practical cashmere scarf, instead, she left it behind on my sofa without saying a word. During their home renovation 6 months ago, Mark asked for a short-term loan to cover luxury kitchen tiles that exceeded their budget. I politely declined, suggesting they stick to their original remodeling plan until they saved additional funds. Vanessa held a quiet grudge for weeks, missing family Sunday dinners, while making passive-aggressive comments about relatives who hoarded wealth. Now seated across from her extended family, I observed the familiar dynamic unfolding once again with sharper clarity. Evelyn recounted her recent European vacation details, constantly pointing out how superior luxury accommodations were compared to standard hotels. She dropped subtle hints that retirees should be pampered by those around them who had more financial security. Mark remained mostly silent, staring down at his plate while his wife ordered 3 additional dessert platters for the table. The cousins freely consumed the top-shelf liquor, treating the evening like an open banquet with zero restraint. Throughout the entire meal, neither Vanessa nor Evelyn asked Mark how his small architectural firm was performing. They treated the dinner as an entitlement rather than a thoughtful celebration honoring a milestone. I maintained my composure, sipping my iced tea while listening attentively to their grand stories. I recognized that this evening was not a simple miscommunication about dinner plans, but a deliberate pattern of behavior that needed a firm boundary. I carefully placed my cloth napkin on the table, observing the final wine bottles being emptied as the waitstaff prepared to present the total check. When the server placed the leather bill booklet in the center of the table, the conversation suddenly paused. Vanessa picked up the booklet, opened it briefly, and let out a light, practiced laugh that lacked genuine warmth. The total came to exactly $6,200, largely driven by the high-end wines and imported seafood delicacies. Without consulting her mother or husband, Vanessa leaned across the table and pushed the booklet directly toward my plate. "You can afford it," my daughter-in-law said, pushing the $6,200 bill toward me with a smug smile. I looked down at the receipt, then looked up at Evelyn, who was casually applying lipstick without reaching for her purse. The entire table waited in silence, assuming my traditional desire to avoid public confrontation would force me to pull out my credit card. Instead of reacting with anger or visible distress, I took a slow breath and evaluated the situation clearly. I reached into my purse, pulled out my wallet, and extracted $90 in cash, which covered my cod tea tax and generous tip. I laid the bills neatly beside my plate, deliberately leaving the rest of the massive total completely untouched. Then, with a calm and deliberate motion, I smiled, slid it across the table to her mother, and said, "Then she can too." Evelyn froze with her lipstick tube halfway to her mouth, her eyes widening in complete shock at my direct statement. Vanessa's smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sharp indignation as the remaining relatives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Mark stared at the booklet, sitting in front of his mother-in-law, his face flushing dark red under the warm dining room lights. Evelyn stuttered, stammering that she was the guest of honor and had not planned on spending her own funds tonight. I met her gaze steadily, keeping my posture relaxed while asserting my boundary without raising my voice once. Evelyn fumbled with her handbag, nervously pulling out a gold credit card while glaring across the linen table at me. Vanessa leaned over to whisper urgently to her mother, her voice carrying sharp tones of embarrassment and frustration. Mark cleared his throat and offered to pay a third of the bill, but his card was temporarily declined due to recent renovation expenses. The server stood discreetly by the service station, waiting patiently, while Evelyn reluctantly handed over her card to process the full balance. The remaining dinner conversation collapsed into awkward silence, with no one daring to order after-dinner coffees or digestives. When we walked out to the harbor parking area, the evening air felt noticeably colder against the ocean tide. Vanessa pulled Mark toward their sedan, barely acknowledging my departure as she hurried her mother into the passenger seat. I drove back to my cottage in peace, feeling a profound sense of clarity rather than regret or anxiety. The following morning, I woke up early to work on my backyard garden, pruning the rose bushes along the fence line. Mark called around 10 o'clock, his voice heavy with exhaustion from an argument that had clearly lasted all night. He claimed I had humiliated Vanessa's family in front of the waitstaff and ruined his mother-in-law's retirement celebration. I listened patiently until he finished his complaint, refusing to offer an apology for protecting my own personal finances. I pointed out that expecting an uninvited guest to pay for $6,000 of luxury items was entirely unreasonable. Mark tried to argue that family members should support one another financially without keeping strict tally of costs. I reminded him that true support requires mutual respect, which was completely absent during the previous night's dinner. He remained quiet for a moment, unable to counter my logic, before making a quick excuse to hang up. I returned to my gardening, feeling firm in my decision to establish permanent boundaries with his household. Over the next 2 weeks, I decided to make subtle adjustments to my daily routine and availability. Previously, I spent every Thursday afternoon babysitting Mark and Vanessa's 8-year-old son, Leo, while they attended social gatherings. I enjoyed my time with my grandson, but I realized my constant helpfulness was being taken for granted by his parents. When Vanessa texted asking if I could pick Leo up after school on Thursday, I replied politely that I had prior commitments. She called immediately, sounding surprised that my schedule was not completely open to accommodate her last-minute needs. I explained that I had enrolled in an afternoon water aerobics class at the local community center twice a week. Vanessa expressed irritation, suggesting that family duties should take priority over personal recreational activities. I calmly informed her that my schedule was locked for the month, giving her ample time to make alternative childcare arrangements. Mark called later that evening, attempting to mediate the situation by offering to pay for my gas if I helped out. I gently explained that the issue was not about money, but about respecting my time and personal independence. During the weekend, I attended a local historical society meeting and reconnected with several old friends from my physical therapy practice. We planned a series of day trips along the New England coast, focusing on antiquing and local historical site tours. For years, I had put my own interests on hold to remain readily available for Mark's household emergencies. Reclaiming my independence felt empowering, establishing a healthy distance between my daily life and their ongoing marital friction. When Leo called to ask about his garden project at my house, I invited him over for Saturday afternoon baking. I made sure to frame my interactions around quality time with my grandson, rather than providing free labor for his parents. Vanessa stopped sending passive-aggressive text messages when she realized her usual tactics yielded no reaction from me whatsoever. By early autumn, the leaves along my coastal neighborhood turned vibrant shades of amber and deep crimson. I continued my regular fitness classes at the community center, expanding my social circle to include several active retirees from town. Mark visited my cottage alone one Tuesday afternoon, dropping by under the pretense of borrowing an extension ladder from my garage. He sat at my kitchen table sipping coffee while staring out at the backyard foliage with visible exhaustion around his eyes. He admitted that his household finances were strained due to excessive credit card debt accumulated over the past year. Vanessa had insisted on maintaining an expensive lifestyle that exceeded their joint income, using credit to cover high-end social outings. He subtly hinted that a small financial gift from me could help consolidate their high-interest debt payments before winter. I listened carefully, resisting the maternal urge to immediately fix his problems with my hard-earned savings account. I reminded him that managing household expenses required making difficult choices and establishing realistic boundaries with his spouse. I offered to help him create a strict monthly budget drawing on my decades of practical financial management experience. Mark looked disappointed, realizing that my offer involved practical guidance rather than writing a check to cover their mistakes. He admitted that Vanessa expected my estate to eventually solve their long-term financial difficulties without them changing their habits. Hearing this confirmed my suspicion that my financial restraint was necessary to force them toward true maturity and accountability. I gently explained that my savings were designated for my own long-term health care and living expenses during retirement. Mark sat in silence for a long moment, processing the reality that my funds would not serve as their safety net. He thanked me for the coffee, left the kitchen, and loaded the ladder into his truck without bringing up money again. A month later, Vanessa showed up at my front porch without calling, first carrying a thick binder under her arm. She wore a bright smile that felt distinctly staged stepping into my foyer before I officially invited her inside. She announced that she was organizing a multi-family vacation to a resort in South Carolina for the upcoming spring break. Vanessa laid out colorful brochures across my dining room table, detailing oceanfront villas and private golf course amenities. She explained that by booking a large family package, everyone could save money on accommodations and dining plans. Then she slid a printed expense breakdown toward me, showing my designated contribution toward the resort down payment. The calculation showed that I was expected to pay for 60% of the total villa rental costs up front. Vanessa claimed this was fair because the master suite was allocated to me for the entire week-long stay. She added that Evelyn and her extended cousins would also occupy smaller rooms within the same rental villa property. I picked up the printed sheet, looked at the numbers, and set it down beside her glossy travel brochures. I told her plainly that I had no interest in attending a group vacation or funding accommodations for her relatives. Vanessa's artificial warmth evaporated immediately, her tone shifting to sharp disbelief as she stood up from the table. She accused me of being cold and unsupportive of family bonding opportunities, claiming I was holding a grudge over dinner. I reminded her that planning an expensive trip using someone else's money without prior consent was fundamentally disrespectful. She argued that as the matriarch of the family, I had an obligation to contribute to shared memories for Leo. I pointed out that my relationship with Leo was built on time spent together, not expensive resort trips. Vanessa gathered her binder hastily, warning me that my refusal would strain my relationship with Mark permanently. That evening, Mark called me in a state of visible panic, his voice echoing from his quiet home office space. Vanessa had given him an ultimatum demanding that he convince me to fund the vacation or face serious marital consequences. For the first time, Mark sounded angry with me, accusing me of creating division in his home by refusing to cooperate. He claimed that my refusal to pay for the dinner and the trip made him look weak in front of his in-laws. I remained sitting at my desk, looking over my monthly utility bills and staying completely composed throughout his outburst. I told Mark that his feeling of weakness stemmed from his refusal to stand up to unreasonable demands within his marriage. I explained that I had spent 40 years working hard, saving responsibly, and raising him to be an independent adult. I had no intention of allowing my retirement years to be dictated by his wife's unbridled material desires. Mark fell silent on the line, the weight of my words finally breaking through his defensive reaction. He admitted that he was terrified of the growing debt, but lacked the courage to confront Vanessa about her spending. I told him that avoiding conflict by pushing expenses onto his mother was unfair to everyone involved in the situation. I expressed my love for him clearly, but reiterated that my boundary regarding my personal finances was absolute and permanent. I suggested he seek professional financial counseling to help structure their household budget before their debt grew completely unmanageable. Mark took a deep breath, his tone softening as he acknowledged that I was right about their unsustainable spending patterns. He realized that relying on my money was a temporary distraction from the real issues affecting his household. We ended the call on a quiet note with Mark, promising to address the debt issue directly with Vanessa that weekend. 3 days later, Mark invited me to meet him at a small diner near his architectural office for lunch. He looked tired, but the anxious tension that usually held his shoulders tight seemed noticeably diminished during our meeting. He informed me that he had sat down with Vanessa and presented a complete ledger of their current financial obligations. He insisted on canceling the South Carolina trip entirely, despite strong pushback from Vanessa and her mother, Evelyn. Furthermore, Mark established separate bank accounts to ensure household bills and mortgage payments were secured before any discretionary spending occurred. Vanessa was furious initially, but faced with clear financial facts, she was forced to accept the new reality of their situation. She took a part-time job at a local boutique to generate her own discretionary income for luxury personal purchases. Mark thanked me for standing my ground at the restaurant and refusing to enable their poor financial choices any further. He admitted that my firm response forced him to step up and take responsibility for his own family's future. I smiled, reaching across the booth to place my hand over his proud, to see him acting with genuine maturity. I reassured him that my cottage door would always be open for family meals and quiet weekend visits with Leo. However, the days of being viewed as a financial safety net for irresponsible habits were officially over for good. We finished our lunch together in comfortable conversation, discussing his latest architectural design project with genuine enthusiasm and mutual respect. As we walked out to our cars, Mark hugged me tightly, thanking me for being a strong parent when he needed guidance. The clear boundary I established at that restaurant table had finally produced the necessary realignment in our family dynamic. I drove back toward the coast, feeling a deep sense of relief as the afternoon sunlight reflected off the ocean water. 6 months later, the spring flowers bloomed brightly along the stone pathway, leading to my coastal home in Rhode Island. My life had settled into a satisfying rhythm, filled with personal pursuits, community activities, and meaningful time with friends. I completed a historic preservation project with the local society presenting our findings to a welcoming audience at the town library. Every Tuesday afternoon, I continued attending my water aerobics class, enjoying the physical activity and steady camaraderie of my peers. Mark brought Leo over every Saturday morning for gardening and woodworking projects, in the small garage workshop I maintained. Leo proudly built a birdhouse for my backyard garden, painting it bright blue and mounting it near the rose bushes. Vanessa occasionally joined them for Sunday afternoon barbecues, her attitude noticeably more respectful and polite toward my personal space. She no longer made passive-aggressive comments about money, having learned that my boundaries were firm and non-negotiable under any circumstances. Evelyn kept her distance, which suited me perfectly as our social circles remained completely separate and independent of each other. Mark's financial discipline began paying off, gradually reducing their high-interest debt while building a small emergency savings fund for their home. He looked healthier and more confident, having taken full ownership of his role as a husband, father, and professional. My relationship with my son was now built on a foundation of adult equality rather than financial dependency or passive resentment. I sat on my front porch in the late afternoon enjoying a warm cup of herbal tea while watching the tide roll in. The crisp sea breeze felt refreshing, reminding me that maintaining dignity and clear boundaries brings true peace to one's life. I had protected my hard-earned independence, guided my son toward true adulthood, and preserved my own self-respect without compromising my values.